Hello, hello, hello! Greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of green across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome back, my dear, marvelous, wonderful scholars, to the study. Hello there, hello there, hello there. Hello there, Kintron. Congratulations on getting first. Hello there, Yulian20. Hello there, Private Maverick. And congratulations, Yulian20, on getting a 5 stream streak. Oh my goodness, that's a lot. Oh, oh my goodness. How is everyone this afternoon, morning, or evening, or wherever you may be across this vast, marvelous multiverse, as I said in my intro? Ah. As for me, it's been a very stressful day. um, yeah, Yulian20, better than I could have ever imagined. Well, good, good. I'm glad to hear it. I've been stressed out as, well, what you know. It's been very, very stressful. There were a couple times when I just wanted to kind of fall apart. But, I thought to myself, I've got a stream tonight. I've got my wonderful scholars to see. And that perked me right up. And that's the story I'm going to stick to. Um, and the other thing, so the Celestial Cat came to visit just now, um, and she has various different little sleeping areas across the study. She has discovered a new one. There's a nice little space underneath my reading table here, right down here. That is perfect for putting your feet up on and putting some storing stuff in. She has figured out how to fit herself right on that shelf and curl up on it. It was just like I was gonna put my feet up and I looked down and then there she is just staring at me with those eyes. It was just the funniest thing ever. I didn't dare move her either. It's like I don't want to kick her, I don't want to hurt her, but oh my goodness. Uh, she did finally wander off somewhere around here. I don't know where she went. Um, but yes, that's a new thing here in the study apparently. Excuse me. So then, tonight, we're going to be continuing our reading of Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped, a book which was a reading which has been made possible thanks to the generous and wonderful actions of Kintron, our favorite fairy tale wolf. Um, but yes, we started last week after some technical difficulties. But as a quick recap of what happened, the story so far follows a young man named Daniel Balfour, whose father has passed away. He has gone out to seek his uncle, Ebenezer Balfour, who lives in a fairly ill-reputed home. And already the uncle has apparently tried to murder David. Um, but David has survived, and as we left our story last time, David managed to lock his uncle up in his bedroom for the night. But we'll see where that goes from then. So, my dear scholars, what say you? Shall we continue our adventure out among... what do I say? Horse, what do I say? Oh, okay. Shall we continue our adventure following Daniel Balfour and his misfortunes that may befall him? Julian20 says, yes, please. All right, all right. So then, my dear scholars, sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage, whatever you're choosing. Fluff up your pillows if you have any, and dim the lights if possible. And let us continue our reading of Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 5. I Go to the Queen's Ferry. Much rain fell in the night, and the next morning there blew a bitter wintry wind out of the northwest, driving scattered clouds. For all that, and before the sun began to peep or the last of the stars had vanished, I made my way to the side of the burn and had a plunge in a deep whirling pool. All aglow from my bath, I sat down once more beside the fire, which I replenished, and began gravely to consider my position. Kinshot, it took a while for my streak to pop up. Oh, a 15 stream streak. Oh my goodness, that's a lot. Congratulations, Kinshot, being here for 15. Oh, wow, that is so much. I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked. Which I don't remember what my I don't remember what the code for my surprise things. But I'm shocked. I'm surprised. Thank you, Kinshot. There was now no doubt about my uncle's enmity. There was no doubt I carried my life in my hand, and he would leave no stone unturned that he might compass my destruction. But I was young and spirited, and like most lads that have been country bred, I had a great opinion of my shrewdness. I had come to his door no better than a beggar, and little more than a child. He had met me with treachery and violence. It would be a fine consumption to take the upper hand and drive him like a herd of sheep. I sat there nursing my knee and smiling at the fire. I saw myself in fancy smell out his secrets one after another. I saw myself in fancy smell out his secret. That is such a odd sentence. Huh. I saw myself in fancy smell out his secrets one after another, and grow to be that man's king and ruler. The warlock of Essendine, they say, had made a mirror in which men could read the future. It must have been of other stuff than burning coal, for in all the shapes and pictures that I sat and gazed at, there was never a ship, never a seaman with hairy cap, never a big bludgeon for my head, or the least sign of all those tribulations that were ripe to fall on me. Ooh, we're getting a little bit of a look forward in the story. Presently, all swollen with conceit, I went upstairs and gave my prisoner his liberty. He gave me good morning civilly, and I gave the same to him, smiling down upon him from the heights of my sufficiency. Soon we were set to breakfast, as it might have been the day before. Well, sir, said I with a jeering tone, have you nothing more to say to me? And then, as he made no articulate reply, it will be time, I think, to understand each other, I continued. You took me for a country Johnny Raw, with no more mother wit or courage than a porridge stick. They talk a lot about porridge in this book, don't they? I took you for a good man, or no worse than others at the least. It seems we are both wrong. What cause you have to fear me, to cheat me, and to attempt my life? He murmured something about a jest. Julian 20, better than gruel. It's not much different than gruel, though, is it? Porridge is slightly better than gruel, let's be honest. And that he liked a bit of fun, and then, seeing me smile, changed his tone, and assured me he would make all clear as soon as we had breakfasted. I saw by his face that he had no lie ready for me, though he was hard at work preparing one, and I think I was about to tell him so, when we were interrupted by a knocking at the door. Bidding my uncle sit where he was, I went to open it, and found on the doorstep a half-grown boy in sea clothes. He had no sooner seen me than he began to dance some steps to the sea hornpipe. Oh my goodness. If you don't know what the sea hornpipe is, um, I'm sure many of you, of course, have seen animated cartoons from the past and such. There's that very stereotypical sailor dance. I better not hum it. I don't know if the I don't think the it's I don't think that music is in the public domain. The that sort of thing. If you ever seen that being danced in those cartoons, that is the hornpipe. So that is what this Kintron Popeyes them. Yeah, that is the dance this little kid is doing in front of David as he's standing there. So this little kid, for some reason, has just broken into a random sailor dance, which I think I'm not 100% sure was a method of kind of greeting when it came to being a sailor back then, but I don't know. Kintron, no worse than Gandhi dancing, I suppose. Oh, now I have to look up Gandhi dancing. I have no idea what Gandhi dancing is. Oh, that's something to look up then. Am I going to regret that? Probably. But we'll see. Unit 20, isn't that on the railroad? Kintron, it's safe. Oh, good, good. Glad to hear it. Which I had never seen before, heard of. Which I had never before heard of, far less seen. Snapping his fingers in the air and footing it right cleverly. For all that, he was blue with the cold, and there was something in his face, a look between tears and laughter, that was highly pathetic, and consisted ill with his gaiety of manner. "What cheers, mate?" says he with a cracked voice. I asked him somberly to name his pleasure. "Oh, pleasure!" says he, and then began to sing. Here we go, my dear scholars. It's time once again for Matsu to try and sing a song in a book. Okay. Let's go. "For it's my delight of a shiny night in the season of the year." "Well," said I, "if you have no business at all, I will even be so unmannerly as to shut you out." "Stay, brother!" he cried. "Have you no fun about you, or do you want to get me thrashed? I've brought a letter from old Hesiosi to Mr. Bellflower." Union 20. Gandhi dancer is a slang term used for early railroad workers in the United States. Most formally referred to as section hands who laid and maintained the rails. Interesting. Thank you for the education there, Julian 20. He showed me a letter as he spoke. "And I say, mate," he added, "I'm mortal hungry." "Well," said I, "come into the house, and you shall have a bite if I go empty for it." With that I brought him in, and set him down to my own place, where he fell to greedily on the remains of breakfast, winking to me between whiles, and making many faces, which I think the poor soul considered manly. Kintron, the Gandhi was a large pry bar that they'd stick under the rails to push down on in an attempt to keep the rail level. Oh, that is fascinating, Kintron. Thank you, Julian and Kintron. Thank you for that. Well, we learned something today, my dear scholars. It's always a pleasure to learn something new, isn't it? Oh my goodness. Swallow my spit. Need a drink. Oh. Really. Meanwhile, my uncle had read the letter, and sat thinking. Then suddenly he got to his feet with a great air of liveliness, and pulled me apart into the farthest corner of the room. "Read that," said he, and put the letter in my hand. Here it is lying before me as I write. The Hawes Inn at the Queen's Ferry. Sir, I lie here with my hawser up and down, and send my cabin boy to inform. If you have any further commands for overseas, today will be the last occasion, as the wind will serve as well out of the Firth. I will not seek to deny that I have had crosses with your doer, Mr. Ranculor, of which, if not speedily read up, you may look to see some losses follow. I have drawn a bill upon you, at per margin, and am, sir, your most obedient, humble servant, Elia Hostseason. You see, Davy, resumed my uncle, as soon as he saw that I had done, I have a adventure with this man, Hostseason, the captain of a trading brig, the Covenant of Dysart. Now, if you and me were to walk over with yon lad, I could see the captain at the hawse, or maybe on board the Covenant, if there was papers to be signed. And so far from a loss of time, we can jog on to the lawyer, Mr. Ranculor. After as that come and gone, ye would be you'd be swear, which means unwilling apparently, to believe me upon my naked word. But ye believe Ranculor. He is factor to half the gentry in these parts, an old man forby, highly respected, and he kinna your father. I stood a while and thought. I was going to some place of shipping, which was doubtless populous, and where my uncle durst attempt no violence. And indeed, even the society of the cabin boy so far protected me. Once there, I believed I could force on the visit to the lawyer, even if my uncle were now insincere in proposing it. And perhaps, in the bottom of my heart, I wished a nearer view of the sea and ships. You are to remember that I lived all my life in the inland hills, and just 2 days before had my first sight of the Firth lying like a blue floor, and the sailed ships moving on the face of it, no bigger than toys. One thing with another, I made up my mind. Very well, says I, let us go to the ferry. My uncle got into his hat and coat, and buckled an old rusty cutlass on, and then we trode the fire out, locked the door, and set forth upon our walk. The wind, being in that cold quarter of the northwest, blew nearly in our faces as we went. It was the month of June. The grass was all white with daisies, and the trees with blossom. But, to judge by our blue nails and aching wrists, the time might have been winter, and the whiteness a December frost. Uncle Ebenezer trudged in the ditch, jogging from side to side like an old plowman coming home from work. He never said a word the whole way, and I was thrown for talk on the cabin boy. He told me his name was Ransom, and that he had followed the sea since he was 9, but could not say how old he was, as he had lost his reckoning. He showed me tattoo marks, burying his breast in the teeth of the wind, and in spite of my remonstrances, for I thought it was enough to kill him. He swore horribly whenever he remembered, but more like a silly schoolboy than a man, and boasted of many wild and bad things that he had done. Stealthy thefts, false accusations, aye, and even murder. But all with such a dearth of likelihood in the details, and such a weak and crazy swagger in the delivery, as disposed me rather to pity than to believe him. I asked him of the brig, which he declared was the finest ship that sailed, and of Captain Hostseason, in whose praises he was equally loud. He say Osi, for so he still named the skipper, was a man, by his account, that minded for nothing either in heaven or earth. One that, as people said, would crack on all sail into the day of judgment. Rough, fierce, unscrupulous, and brutal. and all this poor cabin boy had taught himself to admire as something seamanlike and manly. He would only admit one flaw in his idol. "He ain't no seaman," he admitted. "That's Mr. Shawn that navigates the brig. He's the finest seaman in the trade, only for drink. And I tell you I believe it. Why, look here." And turning down his stocking, he showed me a great raw red wound that made my blood red cold. "He done that. Mr. Shawn done it," he said with an air of pride. "What?" I cried. "Do you take such savage usage at his hand? Why, you are no slave to be so handled." I'm slipping into a Welsh accent. Oh no. "No," said the poor mooncalf, changing his tune at once. "And so he'll find. See here." And he showed me a great case knife, which he told me was stolen. "Oh," says he, "let me see him try. I dare him to. I'll do for him. Oh, he ain't the first." And he confirmed it with a poor, silly, ugly oath. I have never felt such pity for anyone in this wide world as I felt for that half-witted creature. And it began to come over me that the brig Covenant, for all her pious name, was little better than a hell upon the sea. "Have you no friends?" said I. He said he had a father in some English seaport. I forget which. "He was a fine man, too," he said, "but he's dead." "In heaven's name," cried I, "can you find no reputable life on shore?" "Oh, no," says he, winking and looking very sly. "They would put me to a trade. I know a trick worth two of that, I do." I asked him what trade could be so dreadful as the one he followed, where he ran the continual peril of his life, not alone from wind and sea, but by the horrid cruelty of those who were his masters. He said it was very true, and then began to praise his life, and tell what a pleasure it was to get on shore with money in his pocket, and spend it like a man, and buy apples and swagger, and surprise what he called stick-in-the-mud boys. "And that it's not all as bad as that," says he. "There's worse off than me. There's the 20-pounders. Oh, laws, you should see them taken on. Why, I've seen a man as old as you, I dare say." To him I seemed old. "Ah, and he had the beard too. Well, and as soon as we cleared out of the river and he had the drug out of his head, my, how he cried and carried on. I made a fine fool of him, I tell you. And then there's little uns too. Oh, little by me, I tell you, I keep them in order. When we carry little uns, I have a rope end of my own to wallop him." Oh my goodness, this sounds horrifying. And so he ran on, until it came in on me what he meant by 20-pounders were those unhappy criminals who were sent overseas to slavery in North America, or the still more unhappy innocents who were kidnapped or trepanned, as the word went, for private interest or vengeance. Oh. Now I'm curious. I wonder what the title of this book means then. Just then we came to the top of the hill, and looked down on the ferry and the Hope. The Firth of Froth, as is very well known, narrows at this point to the width of a good-sized river, which makes a convenient ferry going north, and turns the upper reach into a landlocked haven for all manner of ships. Right in the midst of the narrows lies an inlet with some ruins. On the south shore they have built a pier for the service of the ferry, and at the end of the pier, on the other side of the road, and backed against a pretty garden of holly trees and hawthorns, I could see the building which they called the Hawes Inn. The town of Queensferry lies further west, and the neighborhood of the inn looked pretty lonely at that time of day, for the boat had just gone north with passengers. A skiff, however, lay beside the pier, with some seamen sleeping on the thwarts. This, as Ransom told me, was the brig's boat waiting for the captain, and about half a mile off, and all alone in the anchorage, he showed me the Covenant herself. There was a seagoing bustle on board. Yards were swinging into place, and as the wind blew from that quarter I could hear the song of the sailors as they pulled upon the ropes. After all I had listened to upon the way, I looked at that ship with extreme abhorrence, and from the bottom of my heart I pitied all poor souls that were condemned to sail in her. We had all three pulled up on the brow of the hill, and now I marched across the road and addressed my uncle. "I think it right to tell you, sir," says I, "there's nothing that will bring me on board that Covenant." He seemed awakened from a dream. "Eh?" he said. "What's that?" I told him over again. "Well, well," he said, "we'll have to please ye, I suppose. But what are we standing here for? It's perishing cold, and if I'm no mistaken, they're busking the Covenant for sea." Another little drink. Yeah. So I think we can clearly see what's going to happen here. Now, when he mentions the men put into slavery, we're going to get into it a little bit later in the book. But what specifically David is talking about, especially in this era that the book takes place, are a lot of political prisoners. At the time, very often during this period, political prisoners would be sent into slavery overseas, usually to the Indies, to the Caribbean. There's another book, an excellent book, which someday I may read, Captain Blood, which talks about this as well, and actually takes place around roughly the same time this book takes place. That England, for a lot of the time, used to do that with their political prisoners. I was just going to mention that. Oh, really? Interesting. Didn't know you knew about Captain Blood. But yeah, it was a common practice at the time. So that's what David's talking about. The other thing David was talking about, of course, is people essentially used to pay ships like this to kidnap individuals they wanted to get rid of. They would be lured on board where they would essentially be shamed. What the term is, I apologize. The term at the time was called Shanghaied. Not a proper term. I know it's not proper nowadays, but it is. It that would happen to a lot of individuals. So that's what David's talking about. He's talking about political prisoners being sent into slavery, as well as people who are essentially kidnapped for payment. So we will. Oh my goodness! I just noticed. Give me 1 second, my dear scholars. Oh my goodness! I forgot about this. Horace, why didn't you remind me? What do you mean I should have been doing this myself? I rely on you for half the things. Oh. Did you get on time? Yes, yes, yes. Oh, goodness. Good, good, good. Oh, that was close. Uh, so, the device I'm using to stream here, I forgot to plug it in, and the battery was draining. In a few, I want to say in about a little less than a minute, it would have shut off in the middle of the stream. Uh, Usually Horace reminds me to do these things, but tonight I guess he just wasn't paying attention. What? Come on, you know that was look, you know it's your job to essentially babysit me sometimes. No, we'll talk about this later, okay? Right. All right, let's continue the story then. Chapter 6. What befell at the Queen's Ferry. As soon as we came to the inn, Ransom led us up the stair to a small room, with a bed in it, and heated like an oven by a great fire of coal. At a table hard by the chimney, a tall, dark, somber-looking man sat writing. In spite of the heat of the room, he wore a thick sea jacket buttoned to the neck, and a tall, hairy cap drawn down over his ears. Yet I never saw any man, not even a judge upon the bench, look cooler and more studious and self-possessed than this sea captain. He got to his feet at once, and coming forward, offered his large hand to Ebenezer. "I am proud to see you, Mr. Balfour," said he in a fine, deep voice, "and glad that ye are here in time. The wind's fair, and the tide upon the turn. We'll see the old coal bucket burning on the Isle of May before tonight." "Captain House season," returned my uncle. "You keep your room uncool hot." "It's a habit I have, Mr. Balfour," said the skipper. "I'm a cold, rife man by my nature, and I have a cold blood, sir. There's neither fur nor flannel, no, sir, nor hot rum will warm me up what they call the temperature. Sir, it's the same with most men that have been carbonated, as they call it, in the tropic sea." "Well, well, captain," replied my uncle, "we must all be the way we're made." But it chanced that this fancy of the captain's had a great share in my misfortune. For though I had promised myself not to let my kinsman out of sight, I was both so impatient for a nearer look of the sea, and so sickened by the closeness of the room, that when he told me to run downstairs and play myself a while, I was fool enough to take him at his word. Away I went, therefore, leaving the two men sitting down to a bottle and a great mass of papers, and crossing the road in front of the inn, walked down upon the beach. With the wind in that quarter, only little wavelets, not much bigger than I had seen upon a lake, beat upon the shore. But the weeds were new to me, some green, some brown and long, and some with little bladders that crackled between my fingers. Even so far up the firth, the smell of the sea-water was exceedingly salt and stirring. The Covenant, besides, was beginning to shake out her sails, which hung upon the yards in clusters, and the spirit of all that I beheld put me in thoughts of far voyages and foreign places. I looked too at the seamen with the skiff, big brown fellows, some in shirts, some with jackets, some with colored handkerchiefs about their throats, one with a brace of pistols stuck into his pockets, 2 or 3 with knotty bludgeons, and all with their case knives. I passed the time of day with one that looked less desperate than his fellows, and asked him of the sailing of the brig. He said they would get under way as soon as the ebb set, and expressed his gladness to be out of a port where there were no taverns and fiddlers, but all with such horrifying oaths that I made haste to get away from him. In other words, this sailor has a real filthy mouth. This threw me back on Ransom, who seemed the least wicked of that gang, and who soon came out of the inn and ran to me crying for a bowl of punch. I told him I would give him no such thing, for neither he nor I was of an age for such indulgences. "But a glass of ale you may have, and welcome," said I. Wait, so the kid can't have punch, but he can drink ale. That seems a little bit weird. A little bit odd, I must say. He mopped and mowed at me and called me names, but he was glad to get the ale, for all that. And presently we were set down at a table in the front room of the inn, and both eating and drinking with a good appetite. Here it occurred to me that as the landlord was a man of that country, I might do well to make a friend of him. I offered him a share, as was much the custom in those days, but he was far too great a man to sit with such poor customers as Ransom and myself. And he was leaving the room when I called him back to ask whether he knew Mr. Rancular. "Hoot, aye," says he, "and a very honest man. And oh, by the by," says he, "was it you that came in with Ebenezer?" And when I had told him yes, "Ye'll be no friend of his?" he asked, meaning in the Scottish way that I would be no relative. I told him no, none. "I thought not," said he, "and yet ye have a kind of glyph of Mr. Alexander." Glyph meaning look, apparently. I said it seemed that Ebenezer was ill seen in the country. "Nae doubt," said the landlord. "He's a wicked old man, and as many would like to see him grinning in a toe. Gurning in a toe, a rope. Ginnet Clouston and mony mair that he has hurried out of house and home, and yet he was it's hard to do this dialect. And yet he was a fine young fellow too. But that was before the soul goned abroad about Mr. Alexander. That was like the death of him." "And what was that? And what was that? Yeah. And what was it?" I asked. "Oh, just that he had killed him," said the landlord. "Did you never hear that?" "And what would he kill him for?" said I. "And what for? But just to get the place," said he. "The place?" said I. "The Shaws?" "Nae other place that I ken," said he. Oh, this is so much fun doing this accent. "Aye, man," said I. "Is that so? Was Alexander the eldest son?" "Deed was he," said the landlord. "What else would he have killed him for?" And with that he went away, as he had been impatient to do from the beginning. Of course I had guessed it a long while ago. Excuse me. But it is one thing to guess, another to know. And I sat stunned with my good fortune, and could scarce grow to believe that the same poor lad who had trudged in the dust from Edric Forest not 2 days ago was now one of the rich of the earth, and had a house and broad lands, and might mount his horse tomorrow. All these pleasant things and 1,000 others crowded into my mind, as I sat staring before me out of the inn window, and paying no heed to what I saw. Only I remember that my eye lighted on Captain Hoseason down on the pier among his seamen, and speaking with some authority. And presently he came marching back towards the house, with no mark of a sailor's clumsiness, but carrying his fine tall figure with a manly bearing, and still with the same sombre, grave expression on his face. I wondered if it was possible that Ransom's stories could be true, and half disbelieved them, they fitted so ill with the man's looks. But indeed he was neither so good as I supposed him, nor quite so bad as Ransom did, for in fact he was 2 men, and left the better one behind as soon as he set foot on board his vessel. The next thing I heard my uncle calling me, and found the pair in the road together. It was the captain who addressed me, and that with an air, very flattering to a young lad, of grave equality. I cannot talk. Of grave equality. "Sir," said he. "Mr. Balfour tells me great things of you, and for my own part I like your looks. I wish I was for longer here, that we might make the better friends. But we'll make the most of what we have. You shall come on board my brig for half an hour, till the ebb sets, and drink a bowl with me." Now I long to see the inside of a ship. Somehow I feel this is a bad idea. I long to see the inside of a ship more than words can tell. But I was not going to put myself in jeopardy. And I told him my uncle and I had an appointment with a lawyer. "Aye, aye," said he. "He passed me word of that. But you see, the boat'll set ye ashore on the town pier, and that's but a penny stonecast from Rankiller's house." And here he suddenly leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Take care of the old Todd. He means mischief. Come on board till I can get a word with you." And then, passing his arm through mine, he continued aloud as he set off towards his boat. "But come, what can I bring ye from the Carolinas? Any friend of Mr. Balfour's can command. A roll of tobacco, Indian featherwork, a skin of a wild beast, a stone pipe, a mockingbird that mews for all the world like a cat." A catbird? Huh. "The cardinal bird that is as red as blood. Take your pick and say your pleasure." Let me get another drink of water. It's so dry in here. We have to keep it dry for the book's sake. Human books are not a pretty sight. I should know there are several rooms in the study which are waterlogged, which oddly enough don't affect the books for some reason. By this time we were at the boat side, and he was handing me in. I did not dream of handing back. I thought, "Oh, thank you for the posture check, Julian20. I did not dream of handing back. I thought, the poor fool, that I had found a good friend and helper, and I was rejoiced to see the ship. Excuse me. As soon as we were all set in our places, the boat was thrust off from the pier and began to move over the waters. And what with my pleasure in this new movement and my surprise at our low position, and the appearance of the shores, and the glowing bigness of the brig as we drew near to it, I could hardly understand what the captain said, and must have answered him at random. As soon as we were alongside, where I sat fairly gasping at the ship's height, the strong humming of the tide against its sides, and the pleasant cries of the seamen at their work, Hoseason, declaring that he and I must be the first aboard, ordered a tackle to be sent down from the mainyard. In this I was whipped into the air and set down again on the deck, where the captain stood ready waiting for me, and instantly slipped back his arm under mine. There I stood some while, a little dizzy with the unsteadiness of all around me, perhaps a little afraid, and yet vastly pleased with these strange sights. The captain meanwhile pointing out the strangest, and telling me their names and uses. "But where is my uncle?" said I suddenly. Aye, said Hoseason, with a sudden grimness. "That's the point." I felt I was lost. With all my strength I plucked myself clear of him and ran to the bulwarks. Sure enough, there was the boat pulling for the town, with my uncle sitting in the stern. I gave a piercing cry, "Help! Help! Murder!" so that both sides of the anchorage rang with it, and my uncle turned round where he was sitting, and showed me a face full of cruelty and terror. It was the last I saw. Already strong hands had been plucking me back from the ship's side, and now a thunderbolt seemed to strike me. I saw a great flash of fire and fell senseless. You know, I would think David, after what had happened at the tower, would have known better than to get out of his uncle's sights like this. I mean, really. It just seems like such an odd thing that he would actually trust anyone related to his uncle or knowing his uncle in not putting him in harm's way. But then again, he does mention he's kind of dumb at this point, so, let's be honest, yeah. Alright. Excuse me. Chapter 7. I go to sea in the brig Covenant of Dysart. These chapters are so useful, they're so descriptive. I came to myself in darkness, in great pain, bound hand and foot, and deafened by many unfamiliar noises. There sounded in my ears a roaring of water as of a huge mill dam, the thrashing of heavy sprays, the thundering of the sails, and the shrill cries of seamen. The whole world now heaved giddy up, and now rushed giddily downward. And so sick and hurt was I in body, and my mind so much confounded, that it took me a long while, chasing my thoughts up and down, and ever stunned again by a fresh stab of pain, to realize that I must be lying somewhere bound in the belly of that unlucky ship, and that the wind must have strengthened to a gale. With the clear perception of my plight, there fell upon me a blackness of despair, a horror of remorse at my own folly, and a passion of anger at my uncle, that once more bereft me of my senses. When I returned again to life, the same uproar, the same confused and violent movements shook and deafened me, and presently, to my other pains and distresses, there was added the sickness of an unused landsman on the ship. What? What does that mean? In that time of my adventurous youth I suffered many hardships, but none that were so crushing to my mind and body, or lit by so few hopes, as these first hours aboard the brig. I heard a gunfire. And supposed the storm had proved too strong for us, and we were firing signals of distress. The thought of deliverance, even by death in the deep sea, was welcome to me. Yet it was no such matter, but, as I was afterwards told, a common habit of the captain's, which I here set down to show that even the worst man may have some kindlier side. We were then passing, it appeared, within some miles of Dysart, where the brig was built, and where old Mrs. Hoseason, the captain's mother, had come some years before to live, and whither outward or inward bound, the Covenant was never suffered to go by that place by day without a gun fire and colors shown. Ah? I just don't know. I had no measure of time. Day and night were alike in that ill-smelling cavern of the sea's bowels where I lay, and the misery of my situation drew out the hours to double. How long, therefore, I lay waiting to hear the ship split upon some rock, or to feel her reel head foremost into the depths of the sea, I have not the means of computation. But sleep at length stole from me the consciousness of sorrow. I was awakened by the light of a hand lantern shining in my face. A small man of about 30, with green eyes and a tangle of fair hair, stood looking down at me. "Well," said he, "how goes it?" I answered by a sob, and my visitor then felt my pulse and temples, and set himself to wash and dress the wound upon my scalp. "Aye," said he, "I saw don't." Stroke. "What, man? Cheer up! The world's no done. You've made a bad start of it, but you'll make a better. Have you had any meat?" I said I could not look at, and thereupon he gave me some brandy and water in a tin pannikin, and left me once more to myself. The next time he came to see me, I was lying betwixt sleep and waking, my eyes wide open in the darkness, the sickness quite departed, but succeeded by a horrid giddiness and swimming that was almost worse to bear. I ached besides in every limb, and the cords that bound me seemed to be of fire. The smell of the hole in which I lay seemed to have become a part of me, and during the long intervals since his last visit, I had suffered tortures of fear, now from the scurrying of the ship's rats, that sometimes pattered on my very face, and now from the dismal imaginings that haunt the bed of fever. The glimmer of the lantern as the trap opened shone in like the heaven sunlight, and though it only showed me the strong dark beams of the ship that was my prison, I could have cried aloud for gladness. The man with the green eyes was the first to descend the ladder, and I noticed that he came somewhat unsteadily. He was followed by the captain. Neither said a word, but the first set to and examined me, and dressed my wound as before, while Hoseason looked me in my face with an odd black look. "Now, sir, you see for yourself," said the first. "A high fever, no appetite, no light, no meat. You see for yourself what that means." "I am no conjurer, Mr. Reich," said the captain. "Give me leave, sir," said Reich. "You've a good head upon your shoulders, and a good Scotch tongue to ask with. But I will leave you no manner of excuse. I want that boy taken out of this hole, and put in the forecastle." "What ye may want, sir, is a matter of concern to nobody but yourself," returned the captain. "But I can tell ye that which is to be. Here he is, here he shall bide." "Admitting that you have been paid in a proportion," said the other, "I will crave leave humbly to say I have not. Paid I am, and none too much, to be the second officer of this old tub, and you ken very well if I do my best to earn it. But I was paid for nothing more." "If you could hold back your hand from the tin pan, Mr. Ike, I would have no complaint to make of ye," returned the skipper. "And instead of asking littles, I make bold to say that ye would keep your breath to cool your porridge." Again with the porridge. "Will be required on deck," he added in a sharper note, and set one foot upon the ladder. But Mr. Wright caught him by the sleeve. "Admitting that you have been paid to do a murder," he began. Hoseason turned upon him with a flash. "What's that?" he cried. "What kind of talk is that?" "It seems it is the talk that you can understand," said Mr. Reich, looking him steadily in the face. "Mr. Reich, I have sailed with ye 3 cruises," replied the captain. "In all that time, sir, ye should have learned to know me. I'm a stiff man, and a dour man, but what would ye say the now? Fih, fih! It comes from a bad heart and a black conscience. If ye say the lad will die—" "Aye, will he?" said Mr. Reich. "Well, sir, is not that enough?" said Hoseason. "Flit him where ye please." Jeez. Nasty guy. Thereupon the captain ascended the ladder, and I, who had lain silent throughout this strange conversation, beheld Mr. Reich turn after him, and bow as low as to his knees in what was plainly a spirit of derision. Even in my then state of sickness, I perceived two things: that the mate was touched with liquor, as the captain hinted, and that, drunk or sober, he was like to prove a valuable friend. 5 minutes afterwards, my bonds were cut. I was hoisted on a man's back, carried up to the forecastle, and laid in a bunk on some sea blankets, where the first thing that I did was to lose my senses. It was a blessed thing indeed to open my eyes again upon the daylight, and to find myself in the society of men. The forecastle was a roomy place enough, set all about with berths, in which the men of the watch below were seated, smoking or lying down asleep. The day being calm and the wind fair, the scuttle was open, and not only the good daylight, but from time to time, as the ship rolled, a dusty beam of sunlight shone in, and dazzled and delighted me. I had no sooner moved, moreover, than one of the men brought me a drink of something healing, which Mr. Reich had prepared, and bade me lie still, and I should soon be well again. There were no broken bones, he explained. A claw on the hand, the head was nothin', man, said he. It was me that gave it ye. Wow, that's nice of him. Here I lay for the space of many days, a close prisoner, and not only got my health again, but came to know my companions. They were a rough lot indeed, as sailors mostly are, being men rooted out of all the kindly parts of life, and condemned to toss together on the rough seas with masters no less cruel. There were some among them that had sailed with the pirates and seen things it would be a shame even to speak of. Some were men that had run from the king's ships and went with a halter round their necks, of which they made no secret, and all, as the saying goes, were at a word and a blow with their best friends. Yet I had not been many days shut up with them before I began to be ashamed of my first judgment. When I had drawn away from them at the ferry pier, as though they had been unclean beasts. No class of man is altogether bad, but each has its own faults and virtues, and these shipmates of mine were no exception to the rule. Where am I? Oh, there I am. Rough they were, sure enough, and bad, I suppose, but they had many virtues. They were kind when it occurred to them, simple even beyond the simplicity of a country lad like me, and had some glimmers of honesty. There was one man of maybe 40 that would sit on my berth side for hours and tell me of his wife and child. He was a fisher that had lost his boat, and thus been driven to the deep sea voyaging. Well, it is years ago now, but I have never forgotten him. His wife, who was young by him, as he often told me, waited in vain to see her man return. He would never again make the fire for her in the morning, nor yet keep the barn when she was sick. Indeed, many of these poor fellows, as the event proved, were upon their last cruise. The deep seas and cannibal fish received them, and it is a thankless business to speak ill of the dead. It's interesting that the book's sort of foretelling that everything's happening with these characters. It's kind of sad. Drink. Essentially, it's a spoiler alert within the story. Among other good deeds that they did, they returned my money, which had been shared among them, and though it was about a third short, I was very glad to get it, and hoped great good from it in the land I was going to. The ship was bound for the Carolinas, and you must not suppose that I was going to that place merely as an exile. The trade was even then much depressed. Since that, and with the rebellion of the colonies and the formation of the United States, it has, of course, come to an end. But in those days of my youth, white men were still sold into slavery on the plantations, and that was the destiny to which my wicked uncle had condemned me. As I mentioned earlier, that's what happened to a lot of political prisoners and people like poor David here, who were paid for by these ships. The cabin boy Ransom, from whom I had first heard of these atrocities, came in at times from the roundhouse, where he berthed and served, now nursing a bruised limb in silent agony, now raving against the cruelty of Mr. Shawn. It made my heart bleed, but the men had a great respect for the chief mate, who was, as they said, the only seaman of the whole jinbang, and none such a bad man when he was sober. Indeed, I found that there was a strange peculiarity about our two mates. That Mr. Reich was sullen, unkind, and harsh when he was sober, and Mr. Shawn would not hurt a fly except when he was drinking. I asked about the captain, but I was told drink made no difference upon that man of iron. I did my best in the small time allowed me to make something like a man, or rather I should say something like a boy, of the poor creature Ransom. But his mind was scarce truly human. He could remember nothing of the time before he came to sea, only that his father had made clocks, and had a starling in the parlor, which would whistle the North Country. All else had been blotted out in these years of hardship and cruelties. He had a strange notion of the dry land, picked up from sailor stories, that it was a place where lads were put to some kind of slavery called a trade, and where apprentices were continually lashed and clapped into foul prisons. In a town he thought every second person a decoy, and every third house a place in which seamen would be drugged and murdered. To be sure, I would tell him how kindly I had been myself used upon that dry land he was so much afraid of, and how well fed and carefully taught both by my friends and my parents, and if he had been recently hurt he would weep bitterly and swear to run away. But if he was in his usual crack-brained humor, or, still more, if he had had a glass of spirits in the roundhouse, he would deride the notion. It was Mr. Reich, heaven forgive him, who gave the boy drink, and it was doubtless kindly meant. But besides that, it was ruin to his health. It was the pitifulest thing in life to see this unhappy, unfriended creature staggering and dancing and talking he knew not what. Some of the men laughed, but not all. Others would grow as black as thunder, thinking perhaps of their own childhood or their own children, and bid him stop that nonsense and think what he was doing. As for me, I felt ashamed to look at him, and the poor child still comes about me in my dreams. All this time, you should know, the the Covenant was meeting continual headwinds and tumbling up and down against head seas, so that the scuttle was almost constantly shut and the forecastle lighted only by a swinging lantern on a beam. There was constant labor for all hands. The sails had to be made and shortened every hour. The strain told on the men's temper. There was a growl of quarreling all day long from barth to barth, and as I has and I excuse me, and as I was never allowed to set my foot on deck, you can picture to yourself how weary of my life I grew to be, and how impatient for a change. And a change I was to get, as you shall hear. But I must first tell of a conversation I had with Mr. Reich, which put a little heart in me to bear my troubles. Getting him in a favourable stage of drink, for indeed he never looked near me when he was sober, I pledged him to secrecy, and told him my whole story. He declared it was like a ballad, that he would do his best to help me, that I should have paper, pen, and ink, and write one line to Mr. Campbell and another to Mr. Rankler, and that if I had told the truth, 10 to 1 he would be able, with their help, to pull me through and set me in my rights. And in the meantime, says he, keep your heart up. You're not the only one, I'll tell you that. There's many a man hoeing tobacco overseas that should be mounting his horse at his own door at house. Many and many, and life in all is all a valium at the best. Look at me. I'm a lad's son and more than half a doctor. And here I am, man jack to horse season. I thought it would be civil to ask him for his story. He whistled loud. Never had one, said he. I liked fun, that's all. And he skipped out of the forecastle. Whew. Oh boy. Yeah. We're going to continue the reading. Don't worry, I just need to get a drink in there and a breath. Well, now, again, we know what's going to happen to these sailors. So, developing the doomed character, I guess, is the term you'd use for it. It's a good question on that. Let's see what happens next then, my dear scholars. Chapter 8. The Roundhouse. One night, about 11 o'clock, a man of Mr. Reich's watch, which was on deck, came below for his jacket, and instantly there began to go a whisper about the forecastle that Sean has done for him at last. There was no need of a name. We all knew who was meant. But we had scarce time to get the idea rightly in our heads, far less to speak of it, when the scuttle was again flung open and Captain Hoseason came down the ladder. He looked sharply round the bunks in the tossing light of the lantern, and then, walking straight up to me, he addressed me, to my surprise, in tones of kindness. "My man," said he, "we want ye to serve in the roundhouse. You and Ransom are to change berths. Run away aft with ye." Even as he spoke, 2 seamen appeared in the scuttle, carrying Ransom in their arms, and the ship at that moment gave a great sheer into the sea, and the lantern swinging, the light fell direct on the boy's face. It was as white as wax, and had a look upon it like a dreadful smile. The blood in me ran cold, and I drew in my breath as if I had been struck. "Run away aft! Run away aft with ye!" cried Hoseason. And at that I brushed up the sailors and the boy, who neither spoke nor moved, and ran up the ladder on deck. The brig was sheering swiftly and giddily through a long, cresting swell. She was on the starboard tack, and on the left hand, under the arched foot of the foresail, I could see the sunset still quite bright. This, at such an hour of the night, surprised me greatly, but I was too ignorant to draw the true conclusion that we were going north about round Scotland, and were now on the high sea between the Orkney and Shetland Islands, having avoided the dangerous currents of the Pentland Firth. For my part, who had been so long shut in the dark and knew nothing of headwinds, I thought we might be halfway or more across the Atlantic. And indeed, beyond that I wondered a little at the lateness of the sunset light. I gave no heed to it, and pushed on across the decks, running between the seas, catching at ropes, and only saved from going overboard by one of the hands on deck, who had always been kind to me. The roundhouse for which I was bound, and where I was now to sleep and serve, stood some 6 feet above the decks, and considering the size of the brig was of good dimensions. Inside was a fixed table and bench and two berths, one for the captain and the other for the two mates, turn and turn about. It was all fitted with lockers from top to bottom, so as to stow away the officers' belongings and a part of the ship's stores. There was a second storeroom underneath, which you entered by a hatchway in the middle of the deck. Indeed, all the best of the meat and drink and the whole of the powder were collected in this place, and all the firearms, except the two pieces of brass ordnance, were set in a rack in the aftmost wall of the roundhouse. The most of the cutlasses were in another place. A small window with a shutter on each side and a skylight in the roof gave it light by day, and after dark there was a lamp always burning. It was burning when I entered, not brightly, but enough to show Mr. Shawn sitting at the table with the brandy bottle and a tin pannikin in front of him. He was a tall man, strongly made and very black, and he stared before me on the table like one stupid. He took no notice of my coming in, nor did he move when the captain followed. Excuse me. And leant on the berth beside me, looking darkly at the mate. I stood in great fear of host season, and had my reasons for it. But something told me I need not be afraid of him just then, and I whispered in his ear, "How is he?" He shook his head like one that does not know, and does not wish to think, and his face was very stern. Presently Mr. Wright came in. He gave the captain a glance that meant the boy was dead, as plain as speaking. Oh my goodness, they killed the kid off? That's horrible! And took his place like the rest of us, so that we all three stood without a word, staring down at Mr. Shawn. And Mr. Shawn on his side sat without a word, looking hard upon the table. All of a sudden he put out his hand to take the bottle, and at that Mr. Reich started forward and caught it away from him, rather by surprise than violence, crying out with an oath there had been too much of this work altogether, and that a judgment would fall upon the ship. And as he spoke, the weather sliding doors standing open, he tossed the bottle into the sea. Mr. Shawn was on his feet in a trice. He still looked dazed, but he meant murder, and would have done it for the second time that night had not the captain stepped in between him and his victim. "Sit down!" roars the captain. "You sotted swine! Do you know what you've done? You've murdered the boy!" Mr. Shawn seemed to understand, for he sat down again and put up his hand to his brow. "Well," he said, "he brought me a dirty pannikin." At that word, the captain and I and Mr. Reich all looked at each other for a second, with a kind of frightened look. And then Hostseason walked up to his chief officer, took him by the shoulder, led him across to his bunk, and bade him lie down and go to sleep, as you might speak to a bad child. The murderer cried a little, but he took off his sea boots and obeyed. "Ah!" cried Mr. Reich with a dreadful voice. "You should have interfered long since. It's too late now." "Mr. Reich," said the captain, "this night's work must never be cut in dice. The boy went overboard, sir. That's what the story is, and I would give £5 out of my pocket it was true." He turned to the table. "What made ye throw the good bottle away?" he added. "There was no sense in that, sir. Here, David, draw me another. They're in the bottom locker." And he tossed me a key. "You'll need a glass yourself, sir," he added to Reich. "Yon was an ugly sight to see." So the pair sat down and hobnobbed, and while they did so the murderer, who had been lying and whimpering his berth, raised himself upon his elbow and looked at them and at me. That was the first night of my new duties, and in the course of the next day I had got well into the run of them. I had to serve at the meals which the captain took at regular hours, sitting down with the officer who was off duty. All the day through I would be running with a All the day through I would be running with a dram to one or the other of my three masters, and at night I slept on a blanket, thrown on the deck boards at the aftermost end of the roundhouse, and right in the draught of the two doors. It was a hard and a cold bed, nor was I suffered to sleep without interruption, for someone would be always coming in from deck to get a dram, and when a fresh watch was to be set, two and sometimes all three would sit down and brew a bowl together. How they kept their health I know not, any more than how I kept my own. And yet, in other ways, it was an easy service. There was no cloth to lay. The meals were either of oatmeal porridge or salt junk. Oh, come on, porridge again? Except twice a week, when there was duff. And though I was clumsy enough and, not being firm on my sea legs, sometimes fell with what I was bringing them, both Mr. Reich and the captain were singularly patient. I could not but fancy they were making up leeway with their consciences, and that they would scarce have been so good with me if they had not been worse with Ransom. As for Mr. Shawn, the drink or his crime or the two together had certainly troubled his mind. I cannot say I ever saw him in his proper wits. He never grew used to my being there, stared at me continually. Sometimes I could have thought with terror, and more than once drew back from my hand when I was serving him. I was pretty sure from the first that he had no clear mind of what he had done, and on my second day in the roundhouse I had the proof of it. We were alone, and he had been staring at me a long time, when all at once up he got, as pale as death, and came close up to me, to my great terror. But I had no cause to be afraid of him. "You were not here before?" he asked. "No, sir," said I. "There was another boy?" he asked again, and when I had answered him, "Ah," says he, "I thought that," and went and sat down without another word, except to call for brandy. It sounded like that did really rattled him. Not surprised. You may think it strange, but for all the horror I had, I was still sorry for him. He was a married man with a wife and lease, but whether or no he had a family, I have now forgotten. I hope not. Although it was no very hard life for the time it lasted, which, as you are to hear, was not long, I was as well fed as the best of them. Even their pickles, which were the great deity, excuse me, even their pickles, which were the great dainty, I was allowed my share of, and had I liked, I might have been drunk from morning to night, like Mr. Shawn. I had company too, and good company of its sort. Mr. Reich, who had been to the college, spoke to me like a friend, when he was not sulking, and he told me many curious things, and some that were informing. And even the captain, though he kept me at the stick's end the most part of the time, would sometimes unbuckle a bit, and tell me of the fine countries he had visited. The shadow of poor Ransom, to be sure, lay on all four of us, and on me and Mr. Shawn, in particular, most heavily. And then I had another trouble of my own. Here I was doing dirty work for three men that I looked down upon, and one of whom at least should have hung upon a gallows. That was for the present. And as for the future, I could only see myself slaving alongside of, I'm not going to say the word. It's a word I feel very uncomfortable saying. I know it was of the times. I'm not going to say it. Of blank. In the tobacco fields, Mr. Ruck, perhaps from caution, would never suffer me to say another word about my story. The captain whom I tried to approach rebuffed me like a dog, and would not hear a word. And as the days came and went, my heart sank lower and lower, till I was even glad of the work which kept me from thinking. Um, so my dear scholars, I'm going to give a choice. Should I read one more chapter for the evening, or should I stop for now? Because I can feel my voice starting to strain just a little bit. It feels like. I'm not sure. I could try and do another chapter, but I can feel it feels a little rough now. What do you say, my dear scholars? Yulin 20, rest your voice. Okay. How many chapters are in this book? Better to stop than to strain. Alright, we'll stop here for now. We got through 4 chapters. We got through 4 chapters last time, too. Which is a good stopping point. So, it seems poor David. Although, it's kind of strange that he gets kidnapped, but the book at the same time somewhat paints a sympathetic picture of his kidnappers. It's a little bit odd, to say the least. At the same time, it's so far. What do you think, my dear scholars, of the book so far? It's very different. It's very different from Treasure Island, that's for sure. It's a little bit more slow moving in places. Although, poor Ransom. Poor kid. Union 20, pretty good. Private Maverick, Stockholm's Syndrome. Maybe? I don't know. I mean, he at least feels some compassion for them. But at the same time, very obviously, he knows that things aren't going to turn out well for him in future. I mean, he's essentially being sold into slavery, which he is very, very, very well aware of. So that is weighing on his mind, of course. If it will actually, happen, we shall see. But it's something that he is, as you can tell, very worried about, and knows that as as nice as he's being with the sailors and all the others on the ship, they're basically his jailers, and they're there to sell him. So any sort of friendship is going to be pretty temporary unless they, like, for some reason change their minds, which are unlikely at this point. And as he mentioned before, the only reason they're making him a deckhand or the cabin boy is maybe less out of kindness and more to essentially make themselves feel better by saying, well, yeah, we're going to sell this kid, but at least we're putting him in a better position before he gets sold. Kintron, he's sympathetic with each other, likely getting hired by similar methods. Yeah. As he said, most of the sailors are there on the boat because they have no other choice, which wasn't uncommon back then. I mean, the people who often went to sea were people who, outside those who wanted to go to sea, were people who just had no choice. They were on the run from the law. They were in a bad situation financially. They were just desperate. So that's pretty much. So yeah, I can see it, Kintron, that's the reason why he's sympathetic to them, because they're in no better situation than he is, probably. Unit 20 Shanghai. Yes. So, and some were essentially kidnapped like that. Yes. So, about next week. Or no, no, no. One thing. So this Saturday, I think the time is 12 Central. I'm not sure. I'll be taking part in a collab being hosted by Sophia Ignasi. I'm sure many of you know about her. Where I'll be streaming with other VTubers, all of whom are, I think the term is neurodivergent, and we will be discussing some topics and I believe playing some games too. I am looking forward to it. It's gonna be interesting. We did this last year too, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to being there, and hopefully I'll see you all there. And then next week, of course, if things go according to plan, that's always the benchmark. Things going according to plan. We'll be playing more Psychonauts, hopefully with less technical difficulties, and we will be reading more of Kidnapped. Ooh, and I think Sunday is we're not doing the Dracula collab this Sunday. I think that will be next Sunday. So let's see if there's anyone we can raid for this evening before we go. Let's visit Legacy Bookish. They are doing reading a Plague Doctor romance, so we'll see. We'll visit them. So, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Till we meet each other again at the study. Take care, and I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye bye.